so, we have to be really, really thoughtful about, ceding control to AI. It's a great tool, but if we're, as you point out, if we're not using critical thinking skills and checking the results of AI critically, we could be putting ourselves into a really vulnerable situation.
If you have seen my new book, Discerning the Future, Contemporary Perspectives on Contemporary Challenges, we talk about the fact that many of the significant changes really happened in the latter part of the 20th century and the 21st century. And so we're going to obviously get into some of those, which, interestingly enough, happen in the area of science. So we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, a phrase that we use occasionally around here, transhumanism, and a variety of others. And I think it is going to be very important for us to be able to discern the signs around us, to really understand the world around us, and to be really like the sons of Issachar, which we read about in 1 Chronicles 12:32, who understood the times with knowledge what Israel was to do. And so I think we need to understand our times and understand these issues as well. And certainly some of those issues relate to the area of technology. And a while back, Melanie Martell, who is a publicist for Reasons to Believe, said, wouldn't it be good to get Dr. Rana back on the program? Fazale Rana, Fuz Rana, as we usually refer to him, is an individual that is the president and CEO of Reasons to Believe. He's also a senior scholar there at Reasons to Believe, holds a PhD in chemistry with emphasis in biochemistry from Ohio University. And this is an organization that has been looking at many of these very important issues. So, Dr. Rana, welcome back to Point of View.
Yeah, Kerby, thank you for having me back again. It's been a while, but I've always enjoyed our conversations and just love spending time with you. So thanks for having me.
I'll hold up right now the January issue of Outlook, and it is on the subject of Generation AI, balancing the risks and benefits of artificial intelligence. We also have posted a piece that you did with our good friends at Dallas Theological Seminary. At seminary, we had, of course, an individual, Bill Hendricks, which was there, and you talking about artificial intelligence. So I wanted people to see some of the interaction that you had on that. But this is the first issue that is really changing the world. I've been watching it in terms of the culture, watching it now in terms of the energy usage. And Dr. Rana, one of the things we had is on Monday, we talked about the desire by Elon Musk to put 1 million satellites in low orbit. In some respects, to put the data centers up there, because that is, first of all, great energy. Sun's always shining. Number two, it's always cold up there, so you can cool it down. And I just think it illustrates that we are living through a time in which I think AI is going to change everything. Don't you think?
Yes, I sure do. And, it's not even, I think, possible to imagine at this point just how transformative AI is going to be. But it's definitely going to be transformative. And, it's exciting on one hand because I think there's some real beneficial applications of AI that are already in play, but it's also going to change everything about the world that we live in. And my ultimate concern, though, is that it's also going to change potentially how we think about who we are as human beings. And there's a real potential for AI, I think, to undermine the biblical view of human beings as image bearers, as creatures that stand apart from all other creatures that God has made, where the argument would be, we're just meat computers and AI is just a silicon-based version of us and should be afforded rights and those types of things. So the transformation is going to be wide-ranging, but we can't neglect, I think, what is it going to do to that question, who are we as human beings?
Yes. Well, and again, we're created in the image of God, and this Saturday here in Dallas, another organization, which I know you're familiar with, Discovery Institute, is doing their event. On Monday, I also had a chance to interview Stephen Meyer, and they thought I did such a good job. I get to interview him again at the conference about this idea of really the fact that we're created in God's image, but whether it's genetic engineering and we can create various kinds of new creatures, or maybe living creatures with machines, cyborgs, or just even robots, I think this is going to be one of the most significant challenges to what those of us in a theological community refer to our biblical anthropology. And that's exactly what you've been talking about.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There are these advances that are taking place, not just only in AI, as you mentioned, but in other areas of biotechnology, where we now have the capacity to begin to alter our biology as human beings. As you mentioned, gene editing is one, but something that's really progressing at a breakneck pace is the creation of brain-computer interfaces, which are these electronic devices that are implanted in the human brain, and that the user can learn to control computer hardware and computer software with these brain-computer interfaces. And in fact, some of them that are more sophisticated will actually use AI technology to extract the electrical activity in the brain and discern user intent and communicate that to, again, software and hardware. And this is going to revolutionize how we treat people that are amputees, that are paraplegic and quadriplegic, as well as people that are locked in. It's going to give them capacity to control exoskeletons and robotic prosthetic limbs, and even be able to communicate, through this type of technology. But it also, again, raises some really interesting questions about our identity as human beings, and there's the prospect of using this technology to enhance human beings.
Well, again,
beyond our...
Yeah, go ahead.
No, please.
One of the things I wanted to say is that sometimes when I teach at the seminary, which we just mentioned a minute ago, in the old days, I used to go in there when we were talking about genetic engineering and ask, would a clone have a soul? And that always leads to an interesting discussion about where the soulishness of human beings are. But now I think the next time I go in there, I'm not only going to ask that question, but I'm going to ask, would an intelligent community and maybe an AI agent have a soul? Because it just illustrates, again, how really important these issues are. So I thought we'd talk about the benefits, at least, of AI, and there are many, because some people have said that it might even rewrite what's called the rights law, which when a business begins, it learns from its experiences of production and distribution. But AI, Dr. Rana, can actually run some of those simulations and find the simplest path, the easiest way. It can begin to pull together pieces of material that people would be completely unaware of. And so in some respects, it is already having an impact. And you can see this in the stock market right now in terms of software companies and other businesses, because it's now compressing what used to take a lot longer. So these are some tremendous benefits of AI, aren't they?
Yeah, they sure are. And, my interest has been largely in the area of science, where, AI is incredibly capable of recognizing and discerning patterns that are unperceptible to us as human beings in data. And then you can use that to start establishing correlations and cause and effect relationships. And perhaps one of the greatest scientific achievements, at least from my perspective with AI, is actually predicting protein structures. This is the holy grail of biochemistry, is can we take, an amino acid sequence for a protein and predict what the structure is going to be? And nobody was able to do that. And now you can routinely do this with AI technology. So it's revolutionizing at least some areas of biochemistry, or even in areas of medical diagnosis, where AI can pick up patterns that, again, physicians may not be familiar with if a condition is rare, and be able to diagnose things. So just even from a medical and a scientific perspective, it's going to be transformative. There are even people that are wondering will AI bring an end to science in a sense, at least in the sense that we think of science today, where you don't need researchers in the lab, but AI can do a lot of that work that scientists would otherwise do.
Well, let's talk about that too, because creating new vaccines, and maybe not even needing a vaccine, because if we put, let's say, AI with robotics and nanotechnology and beginning to figure out how to disrupt maybe cells that are producing cancer, it does seem to me that we are really at the edge of a whole new revolution in medicine, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the example you gave is a beautiful example because, as you point out, it's not just simply AI technology in isolation, but you can start combining it with other technologies, and suddenly you've got this really capable and beyond our imagination system that is, again, going to just revolutionize every aspect of our lives, from science to medicine. What's going to happen in the legal arena in terms of, again, analyzing precedents and discerning patterns that you wouldn't otherwise recognize. I think it's going to create some really novel arguments in a legal setting. So no matter where you go, there's just remarkable things that are happening with AI. And in fact, I think people don't appreciate how much AI is already part of our lives. We just take it for granted, but it's there from when we go to Amazon to make a purchase or we watch Netflix. I mean, AI is all around us.
And again, I think you just mentioned the one about lawyers. I did a commentary the other day where they were saying, well, AI really could replace lawyers because AI can actually pass the LSAT. And I had a quote from an individual saying, I hate to tell you this, but I'm a lawyer and I can't even think of a day as a lawyer where I use LSAT kinds of material. So I don't think they're going to necessarily get rid of lawyers. But at the same time, as well as I do, there have been some lawsuits and some court cases in which they've allowed AI to write a court brief and then lost because it was citing fictitious cases and things like that, these so-called AI hallucinations, which kind of brings us into the other part of this. That is, if you're using ChatGPT or a list of all sorts of other AI technologies, it's just like when young people would go to Wikipedia to do their research, we'd say, that might be true, but it might not be. You want to check your sources and facts. And that's, I think, one of the concerns that people have. It isn't always as accurate as you would like it to be. And that's going to cause a problem for people that don't have critical thinking skills, because it's going to be even more important for us to develop some kind of discernment, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're bringing up a really important point. And it's one thing and I've had that experience myself using Grok and Bard and those different AI types of packages to do research, is that it's come across fictitious or journal articles to substantiate a particular point that it's making. And this is a nuisance when we talk about research, right? But think about giving AI, let's just use the idea of medical diagnoses, giving AI that power to not only to do the medical diagnosis where it's just accepted uncritically. If the AI starts to hallucinate then, or there's a mistake that's made by the AI because the training hasn't been proper, now you're talking about consequences that could take an individual's life. Or if you're giving AI control of, let's say, the electrical grid to create efficiencies, what happens if that AI hallucinates and makes a mistake? It could lead to an utter catastrophe. So, we have to be really, really thoughtful about, ceding control to AI. It's a great tool, but as you point out, if we're not using critical thinking skills and checking the results of AI critically, we could be putting ourselves into a really vulnerable situation.
Well, and again, just before we take a break, let's talk about some of the concerns that we should raise as Christians. One of those is the fact that, as one individual said, who wrote recently in my Yale alumni magazine, that because with ChatGPT and some of those, they talk, he said it's almost impossible to resist treating software that talks as something that also thinks. So in some respects, we maybe give it too much credence and too much power. And so I wrote a commentary on that earlier this month. But then the one that just came out the other day, we did a roundtable here, Dr. Rana, about AI sermons, because there was some articles that came out about the majority of pastors now using AI to prepare sermons. And so in some respects, if you're talking about using one of these technologies to check some facts, maybe use Grammarly to check your grammar, that's one thing. But I fear that you might have some people just calling up ChatGPT and write me a sermon on 1 Peter 3 or write me a sermon on the 10 Commandments. These are the kinds of dangers that we as Christians need to pay attention to.
Yes, exactly right. And my big concern, too, is that, that creativity is very much an integral part of who we are as human beings. And when you start using AI technology to take away human creativity, whether it's writing a sermon, writing a book, or poetry, or music, or producing art or videos, as examples, you are really robbing people of the capacity to exercise and express the image of God in them. And that could be really devastating, I think, to humanity as a whole, individuals, but humanity as a whole, if we suddenly cede creativity to AI. It's a great tool, but again, there are, I think, limits that, that really concern me, that if we don't pay attention to, we could really lose what it means to be a human. Another part of being human, too, is just the joy that we get from genuine work, right? That productivity, that work. We were made to work in the garden. And when you, again, remove that capacity for human beings to work and to be productive in that way, I think you actually are undermining who we are as human beings in a substantial way.
Hey there, Megan Kitchen here, creator of the Highlights podcast. Sorry to interrupt, but I would like to ask a small favor if I could. If you appreciate anything about today's episode or it enhances your own point of view, would you please let us know? You can do it easily by sending an email to podcastcomments@pointofview.net. When you email us your feedback, it helps me to create more episodes based on topics that help you and your friends discern a biblical perspective on the world. So, penny for your thoughts? Again, that email is podcastcomments@pointofview.net. Now, back to the episode.
Dr. Rana, for just a minute, again, he is, of course, the president, CEO, and senior scholar at Reasons to Believe, Dr. Fuz Rana, and we have information about him on the website. We have a very good video interview that was done with him and other people at Dallas Theological Seminary. We have one of his articles, Are We More Than Our Genes? But I thought for just a minute, let's come back to your book, Humans 2.0, Scientific, Philosophical, and Theological Perspectives on Transhumanism. That book is, if it's hard to believe, 7 years old, almost 7 years old, and just remarkable. Dr. Rana, how many changes have taken place in the last 7 years since you and Ken Samuels wrote that book?
Yeah, it's mind-boggling in terms of how the science and the technology has progressed, and that we are, have these incredible capabilities to modify our genetic makeup using CRISPR gene editing. And it's gone from being this idea that, at least in concept, could be used to treat human diseases, to the point now where there are these small-scale clinical trials showing that you could, for example, cure sickle cell anemia, which is remarkable, using CRISPR gene editing. Or with brain-computer interfaces, we are looking at the situations now where this technology has gone not quite into the clinical setting, but it's even being commercialized for other non-medical uses, anywhere from gaming to educational applications to augment, educational training and things like that. And, the whole idea of anti-aging is becoming, again, moving from snake oil salesman type stuff to genuinely being able to alter people's chronological age or biological age, so that they actually are biologically younger based on certain markers compared to their chronological age. This is remarkable stuff, and it all feeds into this idea that we could use science and technology to modify our bodies to enhance human beings beyond our natural capability, and maybe in the process kind of extend our life expectancy, pushing towards a practical type of immortality. And so this idea of transhumanism, which was a fringe idea that nobody took seriously, is now very much mainstream in the academy, but it's also mainstreaming in our culture as well, where people are looking to science and technology to solve our problems as human beings, including, again, our mortality.
Yes. Well, let's see if we can get us back to the issue of worldview, because the science that can treat and cure disease is also the science that could create new forms of life or cyborgs or all sorts of things. Leon Cash years ago said, engineering the engineer seems to differ in kind from engineering the engine. And it's one thing to clone various animals. It's another to think about cloning human beings or genetically engineering human beings. And that gets us into this idea of transhumanism. And I want to give you great credit for the fact that 7 years ago, I think I'd written about transhumanism. You have. There may be a few other Christians out there, but there's a transhumanist declaration. There are individuals that are convinced that we should use this technology to create a meta-man or a human race that is far beyond where we are. The argument, I think, is, well, if we're here as a result of millions of years of evolution, chance evolution, certainly scientists in the laboratory can do a better job of creating new forms of life or driving the evolutionary idea. So a lot of this comes back to a secular evolutionary viewpoint versus a Christian viewpoint. Can you sort that out for us?
Yeah, well, I think you're spot on, Kerby, is that it really is boiling down to a worldview issue. And many people that advocate for transhumanism, and you're right. Part of it is, can we attain a practical immortality? Part of it is, let's just take control of our own evolution and create a post-human species
Yes.
that would be so different from us that we wouldn't even recognize them as being human. This is Brave New World type of stuff, and it really is science fiction becoming reality before our very eyes. But many people who hold to a transhumanist worldview are materialists. They are atheists. And in that particular framework, there is no ultimate hope, purpose, and destiny. Nihilism is the most logical outworking of that particular worldview. And there's no hope. But if we could step in and take control of our own evolution and engineer human beings, maybe we could mitigate pain and suffering in the world and create a type of utopia. But boy, if we could extend life expectancy, we can delay the inevitable. We can delay death, and that creates a type of eschatology for an atheist, where there's suddenly some genuine hope and purpose and meaning to human existence. So this is very much a religious idea at its very core, and even though it's dressed up in science and technology, and it sounds all well and good, it really is a religious idea that I think stands in stark opposition to a Christian worldview and ultimately the gospel.
And again, in my chapter that I deal with on transhumanism in the movies, I talk about Gattaca, and we talk about a variety of other issues like Elysium and even, of course, The Matrix and Terminator and on and on and on. But I thought along the way, if Dr. Rana, you'd be willing, we might occasionally take a phone call. And so let's, if we can, go out to California, KNLB. And Kathy, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, I was wondering, because I had caught something on YouTube, Annie Jacobson, and she had uncovered the Pentagon's brain DARPA, and she was explaining how after World War II and how we got into this stuff. And one of the things, too, I was wondering if it was somehow connected to the MK Ultra mind control. But Ron Chapman also had one on Epstein and the secret program that built modern-day AI, which I believe he credited him for being the godfather of that. And then he had one on about Teal and the Antichrist. And I was wondering, would this build us more towards a Babylonian type of governmental system?
Yeah, it gets into the issue of surveillance. We'll get back to the Peter Thiel one because that's kind of interesting. He's an individual that's talking about the Antichrist and the apocalypse and everything. But the broader issue, I think, is, Dr. Rana, once again, you don't know what to believe. We are dealing with deep fakes. We are dealing with a fair amount of, because originally I saw the call there, I thought, well, maybe they're going to be talking about Epstein. And right now you're seeing former presidents who are no longer alive walking on your screen, and you're seeing people before and after they were in different movies, and you really don't know what to believe. And especially during this election season, I would have to say we're going to have to exercise even more discernment about what is real and what is not real. And that is, again, one of the great challenges of artificial intelligence, isn't it?
It sure is. It absolutely is. And, you know, it's scary even when you are on alert to the fact that there could be these deep fakes. Sometimes it's extremely hard to even recognize them. And so this is frightening, you know, and who do you trust, right, to give you information? It's, you know, and yeah, so it's deeply frightening. And, you know, one of the things that's also concerning too is that there is some concern that with brain-computer interfaces, people like Elon Musk, for example, not only want to develop cutting-edge, you know, BCI technology for medical purposes, for humanitarian reasons, but they see it as having commercial applications, where this could be the next user interface, where you just control electronic devices all around you with your thoughts rather than with your voice or with, you know, certain commands.
Yes.
Yeah, but that then opens up you to being hacked, right?
Yes.
Right? Where
that's the first thought that I had. Yes.
Yeah. So it's you know, it's crazy stuff, and it's very easy to start imagining these highly realistic conspiracy theories that probably may not be conspiracies, you know, but may actually be real things that we need to be concerned with.
But another one that you know we've talked about is the idea of a mind and a brain. Now, our evolutionary friends say you think you have a mind, but it's just an artifact of your brain. You're just a meat computer. That's all it is. Everything is biologically predetermined, even genetically predetermined. And I don't want to dismiss all of that, because we also need to recognize that if indeed you have any kind of free will, that gets into one of the booklets I've produced on the issue of criminal justice. And that is, if indeed all you are is your genes, then how can we hold you responsible? And I will admit that there are certain genetic propensities towards alcoholism, some people are more likely to get cancer, some people are more likely to exhibit criminal behavior, yet we need to hold them responsible. And so whether it's genetic determinism or biological determinism, Dr. Rana, again, you have written about this because many people will suggest that free will is an illusion, yet free will is exactly what the Bible talks about, and we are to be held responsible for the choices we make, even if there is sometimes a biological or genetic propensity towards a particular kind of behavior. True?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You know, and you know, we live in a culture where, you know, genetic determinism runs rampant. And, you know, most people on the street would argue that, hey, our genes dictate who we are and what we're going to become. And most biologists would reject genetic determinism but they do argue for biological determinism, that, yeah, maybe our genes aren't the whole story, but when you factor in other considerations, we have no choice but to make the decisions that we make because of essentially life circumstances, psychological factors, and genetic factors. And this is, a devastating position to adopt, because then there's no such thing as ultimately truth, right? Am I just simply holding the perspective that I hold to because this is what's been determined by the forces of nature, and it may not necessarily be true, that I'm not actually holding this viewpoint because I adjudicated it through free will interaction. So to be able to have a concept like truth requires ultimately free will decision-making. And, there are biologists who don't necessarily hold to a Christian worldview who argue that indeed free will is a real thing, that it may be constrained, but that people actually do make choices. And part of their argument is that something called metacognition, which simply means that we think about thinking, right? And in order to think about thinking, right, you have to be able to rise above everything in order to do that. That there's got to be something beyond just simply our brain that is kind of running the whole operation if you're able to think about thinking. And so, even for those people that I think are really thoughtful and honest about what the data shows, even as secularists, they would have to acknowledge that there really is free will, that we have some kind of executive capability to make decisions. And that, of course, then aligns with the biblical perspective and really pushes you closer and closer to this idea that the mind is different from the brain.
Right. And again, that gets back to, if you got Dr. Jerry Coyne or people like that said you're just a meat computer and everything is predetermined biologically or genetically, it gets back to the issue of belief, because the Bible is based on the idea that you can accept Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord, and this isn't biologically predetermined. And the Jerry Coyne argument sometimes is, well, everything's biologically determined. Well, then you were biologically determined to believe in evolution, and Dr. Rana was biologically determined to believe in intelligent design. No. That's they can't. Right. They really, part of the problem, and I teach apologetics oftentimes on this program, is many of these false ideas. You can't live in that world. You can say you don't have free will, but then I'll watch you and you act as if you do have free will, and you hold people accountable as if they do have free will. And so the problem with a lot of these false ideas and these myths that go against the Bible is you just can't live consistently with them. True?
Yeah, that's a beautiful point that you're making, Kerby. And it's when you apply an idea to itself, right, it becomes self-refuting. And the whole notion again of biological determinism and this absence of free will is an unlivable idea. But as soon as you apply it to yourself, it becomes evident that what you've done is you've undermined the whole idea that there's actually truth out there, that truth is a real thing, for the very reasons that you point out. Jerry Coyne have the forces of nature essentially determined that you are going to embrace biological determinism. So yeah, your point's well made, but I think it's a very helpful tool for people as they're confronted with these kinds of ideas in our culture, is to ask just a couple of questions where you're applying the idea back to itself. And oftentimes it becomes evident very quickly that the idea it lacks any kind of genuine credibility.
And again, I think that's one of the things you've been teaching there at Reasons to Believe. So just before we go, let's talk about the fact that we have a link to reasons.org. And also, we have posted 2 interviews. One that is an interview Bill Hendricks did with you for Dallas Theological Seminary on artificial intelligence. And then I wanted to have a link from your website. So we have a link, Are We More Than Our Genes, which you can read, and all of the others. But just before we go, let's talk about the incredible amount amount of research that has existed for many years there at Reasons to Believe, the various scholars that you have, some of the team that is there. You have a library full of resources, and what you might want to just click on is Explore All. Then you can see the blogs, the publications, the podcasts, the interviews, and all the videos. But talk about what's available as people go to reasons.org.
Yeah, well, I mean, what you're going to find is a lot of articles and podcasts and videos that really address a wide range of science-based issues, including some of the issues that we've been talking about today. And I think what people will walk away from after visiting our website is this really clear indication that there's powerful scientific evidence that supports the reality of the Christian worldview, that there's ample evidence for God's existence that come to us from science, and that the creation accounts that we see in Scripture are credible, thanks again to what we see from science, and that science really points us to the reality of a creator and can be something that we can all use as a way to build a bridge to the gospel through what has been made, that God has revealed himself to us in the created order, and that clearly tells us that God exists. It gives us some idea of who he is, but ultimately it points us to the reality of the gospel.
Let me again just thank Melanie for connecting us. Of course, we've had Kenneth Samples on, and I'm glad we've had you back. And let's see if we can do this again. Again, reasons.org, and always a delight to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me, Kerby.
Well, hope you enjoyed the interview because, again, this is a very important issue. And if you'd like to know more, of course, you can go to the website, which is pointofview.net. We look forward to seeing you next time right here on Point of View Highlights.